Soldier's Payday Night from Tarantula Woman.
Doyce Cotton was one of Roscoe's boyhood chums from Charleston, who had become what is called a success. He traveled for a pharmaceutical company. Doyce, Roscoe informed me at the Rosita Club, where we met for a drink early on an overcast Friday afternoon, was stopping by El Paso on business, and he wanted to hit Juarez and do the town. So it was to be the grand tour with all the trimmings. We were to meet Doyce in El Paso at Alligator Park, San Jacinto Plaza, in the center of town that very night. It was all arranged. And tonight was a special night in Ciudad Juarez, Roscoe reminded me. It was payday night for the soldiers stationed at Fort Bliss, and the red light quarter would be jumping. Roscoe had the idea of trying for a loan, a big loan. But there was a drawback. The man, according to Roscoe, was unbelievably tight with his loot. The evening, therefore, Roscoe explained, would be a program engineered to soften Doyce up for the precise moment when Roscoe would pop the question, which meant that, to begin with, we'd have to buy our own drinks, which meant, since we were both broke, that we'd have to stop by the Navy Rose to borrow a few dollars from the bartender, Angel Mike, before meeting Doyce at Alligator Park. Roscoe was wearing a white shirt and a tie, I noticed, as we left the Rosita Club, and he'd shined his shoes. With his folded newspaper and that serious expression on his mug, he could almost have passed for a regular citizen. "And don't go hitting him up for dimes and quarters, okay?" he cautioned me in a tone bordering on hysteria as we headed for the Navy Rose. "Don't get pissed off. You know how you are. This loan means a lot to me. It means my marriage. It means my life." And on like this, like a subway desperado plotting to knock over a gumball machine. But as it turned out, we didn't get the money from Angel Mike, because Angel Mike didn't come to work that evening, and consequently we began sponging drinks off Doyce immediately after meeting him at Alligator Park and crossing back over to Juarez on the Tranvia, thus alienating him rather early in the evening, or at least I did. And Roscoe confronted Doyce and delivered his hard-luck story, not at the propitious moment as he'd carefully planned and rehearsed, but drunkenly across the table at Irma's Club at 3 a.m, in a hateful manner full of scorn and contempt, the contempt that Roscoe expressed so easily, a speech which numbed Doyce. I don't know how to describe Doyce Cotton. I won't try. But he was a twerp. He looked like he'd been on a coffee jag. I could see right off the bat that he disapproved of me. He was clearly shocked to see Roscoe in such a downtrodden state, and his scornful glances told me that he considered me responsible. The whole affair seemed so ludicrous to me that it was all I could do to keep from laughing in his face. I sensed immediately that Roscoe would have rough sledding with Doyce, and the evening bore me out. On the Tranvia, Doyce repeatedly questioned Roscoe about the girls. Apparently, he hadn't been with a woman in months. Roscoe answered in his usual bantering way, keeping up a stream of flashy talk, glancing at me for approval, slipping in lightning bursts of Spanish, quick double entendres, parenthetically mimicking Doyce, dancing around him almost, like a shaman weaving a spell. The first place we hit, because Doyce insisted, was the Follies, a tourist-class strip joint on Avenida Juarez, the main drag. I'd never been to the Follies before. It was hardly the sort of place I would have gone to of my own free will. We sat at a table draped with a gravy-splotched white tablecloth. The girl in the spotlight was naked as a goldfish, but somehow utterly sexless and unappealing. She stood there snapping her gum and grinding her pelvis in a bored, half-hearted way, as though she were fiercely dedicated to making everything seem commonplace and banal. And the beery orchestra with its farting trombones, such world-weariness. "We are all victims," some author once said, and I never felt the truth of this statement like I felt it at that moment sitting in the Follies, watching that bored senorita plodding drearily through her bumps and grinds, while at the white-draped tables the sweating American tourist women sat with their souvenir glasses and ceramic donkeys, and the half-sodden husbands with their sappy smiles and flowered shirts and their arms full of glittery junk. It made me want to cry. Betrayed. For this we descended from the trees. Why wouldn't we be just as well off to live in the open and hunt rabbits with a stick? But at the same time, there was an air about the place of sappy, chowder-headed bliss that made me think back to functions I attended as a child. A fireman's picnic, for example, and a wheezy farting orchestra tuning up on a beery afternoon at a lake somewhere. The softball game just getting underway, the hot dogs sizzling, beer cans being popped open or a keg being tapped, and the air blue with wood smoke, and everyone half in the bag and splashing around in the water, the sun-kissed children, the sneezing cow-like women, and the unshaven trombone man sweating in his undershirt in the sun, the indescribable feeling of small-town America on a Sunday afternoon, which, moony and moronic as it may be, is nevertheless in my blood. Looking back was a luxury I rarely permitted myself. But after this initial visit to the Follies with Doyce, I began hitting the place regularly, usually early in the evening to get sloshed before assaulting Mariscal Street. Always when I dropped by the Follies, the effect was the same. A sappy, boozy, nostalgic feeling engulfed me. I had a few drinks and I shed a few tears. I loved colliding with the jolly, brittle world of Mariscal Street when I was in a dewy, sentimental mood. It lent a surreal quality to the evening. All in all, I'm glad I made that stop with Doyce. From that night forward, whenever I felt like having a good cry, I simply dropped into the Follies and watched the girls take it off. As we're passing in front of the Palacio de Oro, Roscoe suddenly whips off his tie, my tie that I'd loaned him earlier in the week. He hands it to a street musician he's been gabbing with. "Hey," I said, "how come you gave that joker my tie?" "Why? Why? Because he asked me for it." We duck into a bar. A brightly painted whore is taunting a fat man, playfully spanking his enormous belly. The fat man lurches drunkenly, knocking over tables and chairs and smashing bottles and glasses. As we stroll out, the girl is choking with laughter. Soldiers' Payday night in Juarez was a cyclical celebration comparable to the spring solstice, except in Juarez, this pagan festival occurred once a month instead of annually. The way the red light quarter blossomed was phenomenal. It was a rebirth, a regeneration, a primordial resurgence of the life force, an affirmation of life and of sexuality. Above all, it was a joyous re-entrenchment of business as usual. Here we are, the three of us, on that magic night, Soldiers' Payday night, strolling down Mariscal Street, the boulevard of broken dreams. As we approach the Cairo Club, a girl calls to me from a doorway. "Oyes, pescado." Pescado, that's what the girls say. That's what they call us. Fish, suckers, marks, pescados. Pescado. Yep, that's me. Americano, gabacho, güero, pinche inglés. Pescado. I'm the Finn and Hattie and the lox and bagels and the pickled herring all rolled into one. The Nordic adventurer swimming in anchovy paste. That's how they see us devils from El Norte when we're packed sardine tight into the bars on Soldiers' Payday night. That's how we appear in their eyes. We're the blonde beasts, the big bloodthirsty bastards with the fat wallets and the big pointed dicks and tight scrotums loaded with the ice-cold sperm of demons. I often thought about that. I wondered about it. I envisioned it, how they thought of us pescados, how they pictured us. I mean, when things were slack in the lean days each month leading up to Soldiers' Payday. During those slack days before Soldiers' Payday, Mariscal Street was utterly lifeless. In every cantina it was the same. The girls huddled around the Calientone, listlessly painting their nails, reading Dr. Corazon, knitting little baby things. The mariachis tossed pennies with street boys. The pushcart vendors subsisted on their own wares. The tiny loncherias were empty. The cash register was silent. They probably pictured us, the girls, during those lean days, piled up in cold storage, frozen solid, goggle-eyed, with gaping mouths and stiff, useless fins, stacked in the barracks up to the ceiling. A layer of fish, a layer of ice, a layer of fish and a layer of ice. Pescados. Then comes the day, the thrice-hallowed day when the eagle drops his guano, and we all emerge from cold storage in a great influx, Americanos, gabachos, pescados, wiggling our tails like salmon, frantically forging upstream, loaded with money and sperm. Here we come, the bloated sausages from the hinterlands, the bratwurst, the Braunschweiger, the blood sausage and the bonefish, and the Polska kielbasa, the beef trust, the beef injection crew. Mariscal Street on Soldiers' Payday night is a meat market, a carniceria, a flesh auction, a butcher's bench. Just hoist your sex up on the scales. Okay, Johnny. You no come, you no pay nothing. You like to dance, Johnny? Okay, Johnny. Cheap the price. No pagas mucho, Johnny. Short time, chopped meat, $5. Un dime para la música? You wish to buy hot books? Hurry up, Johnny. You no come pretty soon, Johnny? Come. That's the word for tonight. Come. Tonight a white frothy river is welling up behind the sperm-drunk eyes of the girls, behind their sated Gioconda smiles. A tidal wave of sperm is surging through the streets of Juarez, foaming in the gutters, flooding the cantinas, wrenching roofs off houses, floating the joists, fertilizing everything. Tonight, Mother Warriors is a woman with 1,000,000 oviducts. A flesh city suffused with the orgasmic glow of Mab Estrus. Rolling her magical eyes, blowing luminous bubbles of sperm, she clutches at madly spurting genitals, pressing them against her udders, against the lush female sprawl of her cityscape. She tenders the hot milky streams like a harbor master, joyfully marshalling them between her great fellaheen thighs. Tonight, Mother Warriors is a Jezebel, with the taste of spunk in her mouth and the feel of money in her pocket. Tonight, the womb is opened. Tonight, poets and warriors are conceived. Statesmen and murderers are engendered. Tonight, bread rises, milk clabbers, orchards bloom. Tonight, there's music in the streets. The cash register is jingling again. We duck into the Blue Fox, El Zorro Azul. Already things are beginning to fizzle, because Doyce has only one thing on his mind, the girls, and we want a drink, Roscoe and I. Already, as anyone might have predicted, Doyce was resenting having to spring for all the drinks, plus Roscoe had the nerve, right there on the sidewalk, while we were on our way to the Blue Fox, to hit Doyce up for the price of a pint of Urdignola. Roscoe was afraid now that the evening would be cut short, because once Doyce got his nuts off, he'd be heading for the barn in order to save money. The Blue Fox, where I'd often been a patron, featured a plush, dark interior, so dark you couldn't tell what was going on, which in a good many instances was all for the best. The philosophy of attack of the house was that the girls insisted on dancing. They voraciously dragged one to the floor. They relied on body contact, plus a lot of fast, throaty talk delivered close to the ear while dancing pelvis to pelvis. The prices were high, $5 and $6, and the copas were $1.50. All the girls wore evening dresses, and there were tablecloths on the tables. They maintained a certain standard at the Blue Fox. There was no calientone, and unlike the crummier, more comfortable dives, they didn't permit sleeping in the booths. After drinks all around, with Doyce reluctantly shelling out, Roscoe set Doyce up with Concha, La Chichona as we called her, big tits, a very exciting woman, always a crisp satin gown, never drunk or maudlin like so many whores, but cool, soft-spoken, and rather distant. Concha and I had approached the point of copulating on only one occasion. We discussed the price, $7, which I didn't have, and it was admittedly high, the going rate on Mariscal Street being $4, but I was terribly intrigued by the brisk, business-like way she offered herself. Just take it or leave it, as though she were mentioning the price of an article of furniture, a bookcase or an armchair. I spent several evenings with Concha, buying drinks and dancing, but she never permitted me to take liberties. That intrigued me, too. A fascinating woman, Concha. Anyway, Concha was La Reina, the absolute queen of the lot, and Roscoe and I did Doyce a real favor by presenting him to her. I'm almost certain that she would have been compassionate with him, but, characteristically, Doyce balked at the price. I was almost glad. It seemed easier now that we were going to fleece him, or rather that Roscoe was. I never believed in the success of Roscoe's plan, nor did I have any interest in it. Roscoe kept mentioning some insane figure like $500. I assured him that all I wanted to do was get drunk. Next stop, the Navy Rose, where Roscoe endeavored to set Doyce up with Sandra. But, as I might have predicted, this second date we procured for Doyce commenced to fizzle also. Sandra got into one of her moods. She was pissed off at Roscoe for bringing Doyce to her, and thus, quote, treating her like a whore, unquote, a posture which I found ridiculous. As we sat together in the booth, the four of us, she began slinging them down. I could feel the violence and tears rising up in her. It was laughable all the same. Estamos en las camas? This was how Doyce tried to express, do you want to go to bed with me? Sandra punched him in the belly, playfully, yes, but with enough force to knock the wind out of him. Sandra thought nothing of socking a guy, of beating the hell out of him, in fact, all with a jolly smile and an enticing purr of bedroom talk. It was her little girl's way of getting even. Doyce sat by dumbfounded, with his arm awkwardly draped around Sandra's shoulders, trying in his agonized way to feel one of her chiches. She dug her sharp little fingernails into his arm and scratched him in that playful, seemingly innocent way of hers that contained a good deal of careless puppy-like malice or careless kittenish malice. She attacked him with cruel violence, humorously exaggerated for my benefit and for Roscoe's.
Cheap escape. Where's your mother? Son of a bitch.
You want to feel my chiches? This with a few haughty looks down her flared nostrils at Roscoe, scornful but sexily inviting. To me she was friendly, tauntingly so. I basked in the warmth of her gaze, which seemed to ask, "Why do you hang around with such trash?" Because I felt sorry for Doyce, dumbly bearing the brunt of Sandra's attack, I turned her attention to Roscoe by pointing out the scratches the little woman had engraved on his face and hands during one of their recent knockdown dragouts. But my ploy backfired. Sandra lit into Roscoe with no holds barred. "Why do you bring me such a pig as this?" she demanded in Spanish. "Is this one of your countrymen? You güero son of a bitch. Where is your wife, the puta you married? You have no respect. Tienes obligación. Why do you not earn money for your babies, huh? All your money you spend it on fucking. You think only of your Peter. Malcriado." She ripped her red crinoline dress down the middle, baring her breasts, and yelled at Doyce, "Hey, you want my chiches? Puto maricón, toma. Take it, eat it, gabacho son of a bitch. Hey, you!" Just at this moment, the bartender, a new man, he'd only been at the Rose for a few weeks, came shuffling out from behind the bar, hesitantly brandishing a varnished wooden billy club. He was a sedate individual, middle-aged, a fuss budget who would have been more at home selling gardening supplies than tending bar in a whorehouse. Chewing the words through his mustache, he threatened to call the federales. His sense of propriety was wounded, and all because of Sandra's little chiches, her tiny bare breasts, which were nothing to write home about anyway. It made me laugh. So Sandra stormed off to her room after scratching Doyce and frightening him half to death, and roundly cursing us all. "Putos cabrones marihuanos." "I've got it," Roscoe exclaimed as we hit the street. "The Luz de Luna. Minga." "Sure," I murmured. "Minga, the Peruvian pelvis." "Who? What? What did you say? The Peruvian pelvis?" Doyce was beside himself. We hot-footed it to the Luz de Luna, but Minga wasn't on duty that night. So we hit the Green Lantern, the Durango Club, the Delicias, the Adelita, and the Foreign Club, and more. But in every case, either the price was too high, or the girl wasn't quite ravishing enough. As we're standing at the urinal in the Tango Club, Roscoe and I, Roscoe suggests that we simply bop Doyce over the head and take his poke. I laughed in Roscoe's face, but he was serious. He was frantic. His one fixed idea was that he would get the money. I felt mellow. "Look, we're having a good time, aren't we?" I ventured. "Why not let it go at that?" So we go to El Lago Blanco, another white tablecloth joint. The girls were polite, as though it were a church supper. It was here at El Lago Blanco, the White Lake Club, that Roscoe, several months before, got us into a scrape with the federales because of a crazy obsession he had with the pecker checker, a sprightly silver-haired lady whose station was in the hallway just behind the scarred wooden door that led to the girls' rooms. A standard feature in all of the fancier dives, the pecker checker was typically a woman of advanced years dressed in a nurse's rig whose function it was to inspect the dicks of the whore's customers before they went to the room. Following the inspection, one was expected to leave with the lady a small tip, usually a quarter. Roscoe insisted that this particular lady at the White Lake Club, when she examined his penis, took an inordinately long time in going about her business, and that she was, in fact, caressing it, as Roscoe put it. He actually went back several times, going to the room with any girl who happened to be available for the express purpose of gaining an interview with the pecker checker, whose touch had become ecstasy to him due to the intensity of his obsession with her. I won't go into all the details, but there were, for example, the interminable discussions. Was she caressing it or wasn't she? One night, Roscoe decided to end the suspense. Midway through the examination, he made a grab for her. She yelled bloody murder, and the bartender immediately called the cops. We ducked out into the street, but were nabbed by two federales. We got off by emptying our pockets. After the White Lake Club, we allowed ourselves at Doyce's insistence to fall into the clutches of a taxi driver who took us to Irma's Club, a locally famous tourist-class whorehouse off the beaten track. The girls wore white seersucker smocks, like nurses. Everything was spotlessly clean, the white tiled floors freshly mopped, the maids hurrying with folded towels. There was the smell of benzene, of glycerin soap, of Clorox, of various fungicides and fumigants, and the soothing gurgle of running water everywhere. I felt myself sinking into a state of pleasant anesthesia. The place reminded me of a sanitarium, a retreat where you go to take the cold water cure. Even before the drinks arrived, I was converged on and whisked away by one of the Sisters of Mercy. She took me to the room to talk it over, as they say. In the room, the decor was the same, a white sanitized world. I felt giddy, as if I'd been sniffing helium. As we stood facing each other in the vibrating blue light, I had the impression that she was going to give me an inoculation, or an enema, or maybe ask me for a urine specimen. She looked a little bit like Elsa Lanchester in The Bride of Frankenstein, alluring with pouted lips, yet stone-faced and forbidding in a weird, laboratory sort of way. While she mechanically recited her pat speech in English, I coldly ran my hands over her breasts and hips. A perverse sort of excitement seized me, an excitement that had somehow to do with the impersonal quality of the interview. This interlude, when one goes to the room to talk it over, a standard feature like the pecker checker in all the classier joints in Ciudad Juarez, very much resembled the act of putting coins in a parking meter, the idea being to cop as many feels as possible before the meter runs out. Since I'd spent innumerable nights on Mariscal Street, not only buying affection, but when I was broke making the rounds of the free field circuit, I was well schooled in delaying tactics. In this instance, I led off by pretending to speak only German, shouting at her, "Was? Sagt? Hein?" I followed up by repeatedly interrupting her spiel with inane, perplexing, or nonsensical questions, anything to prolong the interlude. I wish I could convey the sense of cold, frenetic excitement. It was like assaulting a dress dummy in the hypersexual ward of a madhouse. It was a ballet in a wax museum. A banquet is what it was, a smorgasbord, an erotic brunch, and before she marched off, exasperated, I managed to enjoy everything. The hors d'oeuvres, the soup of the day, the salad, the papas fritas, the salsa fresca, and even, so to speak, the dessert. Everything but the main course. When I rejoined Roscoe in the booth, he'd just finished reading Doyce off, the venomous speech I touched upon earlier, and Doyce had finally gone to the room with one of the love dolls. Roscoe hurriedly downed Doyce's drink and scooped Doyce's change off the table with a theatrical flourish. He wanted to leave. I insisted that we wait for Doyce. A moment later, Doyce came out, sweating and dazed. There'd been a squabble between Doyce and one of the chambermaids. I went back to see what it was. By this time, the bartender was back there also, inches from my face, brandishing his billy club. The beef, I discovered, was over a silver money clip. Doyce claimed that one of the girls had stolen it. I advised him to forget it, but he persisted. I was certain by now that someone had called the Federales. I hurried out of the hallway and glanced across the room at Roscoe. He was on his feet. We scrammed out the side exit